Kia ora everyone, welcome along to our webinar evening, particularly looking at responsive writing and this idea of motivating reluctant writers. We're really pleased you could join us today. We've got a lovely amount of people joined in, and we're also for the very first time being a little bit adventurous and doing some Facebook Live as well. So for those that haven't been able to join in on Zoom, hopefully you're beaming in through Facebook. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind people that this is an hour webinar. We've got lots we want to get through. So what we're going to do is present all the information to you and then allow a little bit of time at the end to answer any questions that may come through or any comments. If you do have a question or a comment that you'd like to ask us about the program, then please feel free to send it through on the chat function in the Zoom portal or on the comments in Facebook, or using our Q&A function that the webinar provides as well for people watching. And hopefully we'll be able to try and get to those questions that you put through. Hopefully we answer a lot before we reach the end of the webinar, and anything we haven't answered we'll be pleased to answer before we finish closer to 8 o'clock. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Sarah Iono. I'm the Director and CEO of Longworth Education, and we have Linda here. Introduce yourself.
Yeah, kia ora everyone, I'm Linda Chair and I'm the other Director of Longworth Education.
And we are part of a wonderful, wonderful team of PLD providers that support teachers to implement effective evidence-based play pedagogies in the primary school system. And tonight our focus is just to share with you a wonderful program that both Linda and I have used ourselves to support children who are reluctant writers, particularly in the senior end of the school. And we'll go into a little bit more into detail about that as we progress through the evening. So I'll hand it over to Linda for our first slide.
Okay, well, first of all, we'd like to acknowledge the people who actually devised the program and wrote the program. Tony Howe, who is the current principal of Opotiki School, and he worked along with Professor Mary Berryman, who is now at Waikato University. And way back in 2002, we attended a presentation by Tony, who spoke to us about this writing program that he had devised. And we thought it sounded perfect for Lucknow School, which is where I was the deputy principal at the time. And so we took the program and gave it a little twist to make it suit our children, our community. And so the bones of the program we're going to present to you today, which is the acknowledgement to Tony. But I'd like to also talk with you about some of the things that we did at Lucknow that made it sort of special for our school. And I'm sure that if you do take up this program, you'll do the same for your school.
Okay, so we'll go through the selection, how the program runs and how we assess the program, and any particular little tips and suggestions as we go through. And we've also got some resources that we are going to share with you as well.
So the program is really most effective with students year 3 and beyond. At Lucknow School, we did run it with some year 2 students, and they were perhaps the more able year 2s for writing. But our best results were with year 3 and beyond. So that's why we've named this program especially for year 3 and beyond. The students that you're selecting should be students who can write independently, but have a reluctance to write, who don't like writing. They should be students who are able to use word cards and dictionaries to edit their work. And one of the important things in selecting students is, one thing we learned was, it's easy to run away with the idea of I'm going to select all these students and I've got sort of 20 students that I want on the program, and then suddenly find that you don't have enough responders for the students. So it's really important to select your students around about the same time that you ask your community for volunteers to be part of this program, and we'll come into that a little bit later. So it's important then selecting your students and sending a letter out to parents, grandparents, anyone that you know that's perhaps connected with the school, talking about the program, and also send a special letter home to parents to let them know their child has been selected for the program, and outline what exactly the program is. I think it's important for parents to know that they will be communicating with somebody outside the school immediate community, and that to ask permission if that's okay for them to do that.
I think it's important just to backtrack a little bit here and talk a little bit about the overall structure of the program, because I think we've perhaps not made it clear that this is a program that requires people to be paired up to respond. This is why it's called the responsive writing program, to respond to these children. A little bit like a mystery pen pal, to have someone who they're going to write to every week. And so, as Linda said, as you're starting to select those students, to start thinking about who might be available, and the numbers that you're going to be involved with. Obviously, if you've got a community that perhaps there is not a lot of support, then you're going to have to think carefully about who you can draw on, so that you're able to match children to a pen pal, which we'll come to a little bit more in a moment.
Yeah, and some schools found that they had a connection with the local residents, the home of a residence, and elderly folk, and that was a nice way of including those people into a school activity like this.
I know for me, in one instance, actually my husband was a writer for one of the students at Lucknow School. It was just handy that he matched the profile of one of the kids who had an interest in art, and he's an artist, and so some of the staff get involved in terms of partners or parents of staff or children of staff and so on. So it's just about reaching out to your community to find the right match for the children that you're hoping to be a part of the program.
Yeah, so I think the point we're making is don't alert the children that they're on this program until you've got enough adults to match them up with. Otherwise, there's going to be some disappointed children.
So selecting the children and then looking at the organisation. Now, before Linda explains the organisation, I want you to take note of that link that we've got there under the organisation title. I've tried to make it as easy to copy down as possible or to take a photo of. That link will lead you to a file via our Google Drive that has a summary of this organisation there for you. So you can download a summary of this and be able to refer to it again later. We are also recording this presentation, and we'll have a link available on our Facebook page to come back to. And for those of you that are watching us through Zoom, you'll be able to access the Zoom link. But this particular link here will lead you to a summary of the organisation around this program for your use later. So copy it down.
Okay, so once you've had a call for volunteers in your community who would like to be responders for the children, then it's a good idea to meet with the group. So invite them in for morning tea and have the person in the school who's running this to talk to them, because there are certain rules about responding. The children naturally, when they write to their adult, are going to make mistakes in their writing, and that's just normal kid stuff. The idea of this program is for the responders to not correct the child's writing at all. So the child will write as if it's a letter, and whatever mistakes that are made, the responder doesn't mark them at all. It's not for them to do that. However, as you're reading through, you make notes of the mistakes, so you notice them, and you're going to use some of the words in your letter back to the child and use the correct spelling or the correct grammar, or anything that you think that the child, the punctuation, anything you think that you can work into your letter that will be a way of positively responding to those mistakes. Sometimes the responders have used a nom de plume, and that's entirely up to them. Others, you just use your first name. So it's really up to the responder to choose what they would like to do. So once a week, the selected students will write a letter to their mystery pen pal, and that's how I would introduce it to the children. This is a mystery pen pal. You only know their first name. You don't know who they are apart from that. And they have a separate book which they write in, so an exercise book. They set it out as if it's a letter. And so the first letter, because they don't know who the person is really introducing themselves. So they, lots of them would write, "Dear Mystery Pen Pal, my name is, and I like to," etc., etc. So the students are the first ones who write the letter. The writing can be completed at any time and any day, and we used a Thursday as our mark of when it had to be done. So the students then, the teacher has got some autonomy on this because it will need to fit in with the classroom program. So the books then, once the child has written in their book, all the books go to the school office by Thursday. So the responders know that they can call into the school and pick up those books by Thursday. They're going to be there. Now the responders have got from Thursday to Monday morning to respond. So the books will be collected by the responders and returned to the office by Monday. Okay, so that's the general outline of how that works. So the writing topic is always up to the student, but it should always be written as a letter. So before you even start the program, you might like to do a class writing exercise on how do we write letters, because in this day and age, this is something that's a little bit old-fashioned. So, you know, you could do that as part of your shared writing to teach the children this. So before they write, they need time to read their pen pals' letters that's come back to them. So there used to be great excitement on a Monday morning from the children who were on the program. They couldn't wait for their book to come back and the responder had written to them. Now, sometimes they might need some help in reading the responder's letter back to them. But once they've read that letter, it's a good idea for the teacher to sit with them and talk about some of their ideas that how they're going to respond to that letter, just orally. So we're not going to do any planning in the book. We're not going to do webs or anything like that. But just the teacher just talking and sharing some ideas with them. And of course, some students will need extra support with suggestions about what to write. Okay, because that's just a good way of motivating the children for their letter. So the writing is exactly for 10 minutes. So this is something that's short and sharp. Teachers often set the timer and the timer starts the minute the children start writing in their books. So all that oral time before the conversations, that's outside of that 10 minutes. So the children need to be encouraged to write as much as possible in that 10 minutes and to be as interesting and as accurate as possible. And you might like to come in here with some of the first responses that you get back from the children are pretty limited until they get the idea and they get the excitement of what to tell their responder.
Yeah, as a responder, it does feel a little bit like pulling teeth with some of the first few interactions that you have, very, very simple and basic. And I think that's really key to making sure that the person that you're choosing for these students, particularly if you know that these are students who might struggle to get started, in particular, responders who might be able to invoke some more information through their letter. So trying to draw that information out of kids, asking some questions or trying to connect with kids through their response. And that's really important to talk to your responders about that, warn them for it, warn them to say, you know, these are kids that are not going to be writing pages and pages to tell them all about their life, that it is going to be limited to start with, and it's their their response that's going to help bring some more sharing out from the kids involved. Yeah.
So the children write for 10 minutes, and then they, outside of that 10 minutes, they have got a chance to edit their work. So just to reread it, they might want to be using some dictionaries or wordless to correct it, but they don't use any people to help them. This is absolutely independently written. So teachers are not going to help the children how to spell words. We're not going to point out any punctuation that they may not have. There's no input by the teacher at all. The only thing the teacher can do is remind them about the time and just say, well, you know, you've only got a few more minutes to go now. You might need to start winding up now and thinking of last things you can write about, and encouraging them in that way. So tell them when they've got just 1 minute left, okay? Because otherwise it's too much for children to take in if they just write stop now. You've got to give them that time. So at the end of the 10 minutes, the writers immediately change their pencil or pen to a different colour. So obviously this indicates that this is outside of the 10 minutes now, and this is a time that they're going to try and edit their work. So they've got another 5 minutes, and which they must quickly complete the sentences and sign off, and then they try to improve their writing in any way possible. So they can add in words, change things around, put a PS on the end to add a little bit more that they've maybe forgotten. And after this, or on a subsequent day, they may, if they choose, illustrate their writing, but obviously not colour over the words as some children like to do, bearing in mind that you've got some people who are older people who maybe can't see the words so well. So what's interesting is that as the children progress through this over the term, it's lovely to see that they free themselves up, and they do actually draw lots of different pictures, and some children stuck in things, put in photos of themselves and all sorts of bits and pieces in with their writing. They really sort of get onto it, don't they?
Yeah, and again, we noticed that the connection built between my husband responding and the respondee that he was writing to through their art. So while we wanted the child to be writing, and that was the focus, when they had the opportunity to then do some drawing, it gave something further for the respondent to reply back to and say, well, I like the drawing that you shared with me. Have you thought about using this colour for this or that? And so it started a connection between the two based around the art, but writing was the communication point. So that was something that was really special between the two of them. So if you are matching people up and you know that you've got a child who's particularly into motorbikes, and there's a parent in the community who's into motorbikes, who's willing to make that connection, that's the kind of thing you're looking for. And then obviously you can start to encourage the kids to put a photo of your motorbike in with your letterbox. I wonder what your mystery pen pal will say about that. So it's that sort of thing that helps just personalise it between the two.
And you often find too that the responder, the adult, will pop in some illustrations as well, or use some stickers, and just different bits and pieces in with their writing as well. So it becomes quite almost like a gift that they're doing each week.
And I think also another point too is just to monitor the books if there are responders that perhaps have a hard time correcting work, and making sure that your responders are sticking to that rule, because I know for many people, myself included, I love to see good punctuation and grammar. It grates on me if I don't, and there is the urge to go in and just fiddle with it. So it's just to keep an eye on that, and that's really not the focus. It is instead helping the responders know that they're modelling the correct writing and the correct grammar and punctuation that we wanted to see. So just keeping on top of that as well.
And sometimes you might have children who it's hard to read their story, their writing, and what teachers have done is they've just written it out on a piece of paper when the child doesn't see, then just popped it in the book so that the responder can actually read the writing. So that's, and also I think it's important that the responders don't write too much back. You know, we're fluent writers, and they've got to keep it fairly limited for the child. The one thing that will put the child off is picking up their book and seeing like 2 pages of writing from a responder. So it has to be shortened and succinct.
Okay, so we're going to go into the assessment and evaluation process around this program, how we set it up as a pre-intervention, getting that data, and then post-intervention at the end. This is the link to download the assessment sheet that we use for this program. I have also copied it over into the next slide as well. If you can't copy this down quickly or take a photo of it, it's going to come up in the next slide too, so don't panic. But following this link will take you to a Google Sheet, and I've just popped in a sample that sits on this slide here. You can see it just behind, which goes through all the data that we want to collect pre and post to determine the outcome of this responsive writing program. So it's the same link, so copy that link if you missed out on the previous slide.
So you're going to analyse the first letter that the children write and the last letter, and that's the only work that you have to do, if you like. You don't have to monitor anything else in the book. So the very first letter is your first sample of writing, and you're going to work through this sheet, and it's pretty self-explanatory. So in the 10 minutes that the children are writing, you're going to look at the number of words and divide it by 10, obviously. You're going to look at spelling accuracy, the number of words minus the number of errors over the number of words. Okay, so it will make sense once you've got some numbers to go there with it. Don't count self-corrected words as errors, even if they've been corrected during the checking time.
And there's a lovely spelling mistake right in the middle of it. Thought I caught them all. How ironic.
Sentence length, you're going to look at the number of words and the number of sentences, so make a note of that. When counting the number of sentences, disregard the children's punctuation or lack of it and count the number of actual sentences. Okay. And then D, you're looking for full stops, number of correct full stops minus the number of incorrect full stops over the number of full stops actually required. So you're looking at working out a number there. Use of capital letters, you're going to rate that on a 1 to 4 scale, with 1 indicating difficulty and 4 being excellent for their year level. So if they're children that just flood their writing with capital letters, as some of them do, then obviously you're going to have a 1 for that, because they have no idea what a capital letter's about. Vocabulary, rate in the same way on a 1 to 4, and that's going to be a personal observation on your part. And then G, appeal and impact, once again 1 to 4. And then H, list any conjunctions used. Okay, so it gives you a really rich look at their writing, but also I think the point that we need to make is that we need to be able to monitor the improvement from these children, and for some children the appeal and impact of their writing is going to far outweigh the nuts and bolts of their writing. For some it will be the other way around. So it just gives you a really good idea of where each child is.
And it does show that you're working from a point of evaluation. This is not just, we're going to just let them write some letters to some people for a term. It's going to be, we're actually going to get some good data, and we're going to look at the potential impact of this on our reluctant writers and be able to demonstrate progress across that time, getting some deep, rich data from it, which is really useful.
And in my experience running this for several years, there are very few children that don't make progress. and the progress is usually in their attitude towards writing, which is why the program's there in the first place.
Because bearing in mind this, again, as we said right at the start, this is about children who can write, but for whatever reason feel that they can't, or they don't want to, they're not interested in writing. And so really this is not about instructional writing. This is about motivating those reluctant writers to feel confident with writing again, and to enjoy the process of writing, and use it as a tool to communicate. And it's just to give them a little boost back into feeling like writers again. And so that's the intent of this program.
And you'll probably find that the first 2 or 3 letters that the children write, they're going to maybe look to you to give them some inspiration. But you'll soon find that over the term, they will come up with their own ideas, especially when they're responding to the letter that they've received from the adult, because your adults are going to be encouraged to ask them some questions too. If the adults are receiving a letter from the child, there's very little in the letter, in the body of the letter. And I've often had this where, well, what do you say? There's such a little amount there. Then ask them some questions. Okay, so this is something that you can talk to your responders about.
Yeah. Okay. So, some essentials, as we've talked about. Choosing the right responders is really important, and we've talked about the wide variety that you can look for and the community that you can draw upon. If you are in a community that perhaps literacy skills are a little bit challenged, then as we've said, the staff often take on non-diplomes and write to children in that vein. And there's actually a bit of a delight at the end where they find out who they've been writing to, that often the kids are so surprised they've been writing to another teacher in the school, and they take quite great delight in that, I think, as well. So thinking about that, the right responders, they need to understand what we call subtle editing. They need to understand about the sensitivity of content that's shared by the children, and aspects around privacy. If you're in a small community where potentially someone else's parent is writing to a child in the program, we do need to talk about making sure that whatever's shared is respected and private between that conversation.
And I have to add in here that the best people we found, some of the best, were grandparents. And they were just amazing. The letters they would write back, they had lots of time to do that. They were very kind in their letters and very sensitive, and it just seemed to work really well.
And some of our grandparents, I don't want to say all, because I know there's grandparents out there working as well, but some of our grandparents have that little bit more time. And you do want responders who are committed to the entirety of the program. You don't want these responders to be inconsistent with their response, or not available, or drop off, because obviously that will not help the manner of the children involved when suddenly they're not getting a response back to the letters that they've written.
Yeah, and I think that aspect around privacy is really important, because you don't want a child writing a letter and the responder then making comments to another parent at the school, or
a neighbour,
or this has to be fairly private. And like all letters are, it's just for those people that it's meant to be for. So we need to be a little bit sensitive around this. And that's why it's also really important right at the beginning when we said, tell your parents what your child is doing, how they're part of this program, and that they'll be writing to somebody else, and to make sure parents are fine with that.
We've talked about the right students, choosing the right students and the criteria around that. And you as the teacher need to make sure that you're committed to following this through once a week as well, that you're setting aside time for these students to engage in this writing, and also to remember that this is not the instructional writing that's in your classroom, that obviously there will be ongoing, and as part of your literacy program, instructional writing. There'll be guided writing still happening for these kids. They're not missing out. So it means that you do have to come up with a time set aside for these kids to be able to have time to write to their pen pals, and make sure that that happens every week, as well as collecting in the books, having a collection point so that the responders can come in and get the book that they need, setting that up and that system up. Do you want to talk about the system that you ran with that?
Yeah, as I say, the teachers had the autonomy of knowing when the children could write in their books. I'd have to make the point that the children need to be monitored for this. It's not something that children can just grab the book and say, oh, I'm going to write to my pen pal now. They have to be in a monitored situation. So sometimes if you've got children in 4 different classes who are part of this program, teachers have often said, well, I'll take all the children and we'll all write together in one classroom. And that's usually worked quite well. So yeah, you have to make sure that you have teachers who are committed to this, because it does have to be managed particularly well in the restraints of the program. You have to follow the outline. So it has to be once a week. We can't miss weeks, because unless the child's sick, because the responders are waiting, to pick the books up and to respond to them. So, and it's only for 1 term. That's the point. This is short and sharp. It has to begin on week 1. And no matter what is happening in the school, whether children are going off to different activities, there has to be a response once a week.
So I wouldn't choose a term that you've got camp lined up, where you're heading off for a week for camp, because that's going to interrupt the cycle of it. So choose a term where, you don't have those major interruptions, maybe not the term that you've got production on, if it's going to interfere with time commitment somewhere else. I know every term's a busy term, but if you can avoid some of those big ones, where it means that each week you're going to be able to meet this commitment for the term. And that way you're getting that consistency for your reluctant writers as well.
And when you think about it, we're just looking at 20 minutes really. By the time that you've talked to the children about what they might like to write, by the time you've timed them for 10 minutes and then you've given them 5 minutes to check their work, we're only really talking about 20 minutes once a week. That's all you're committed to.
Yeah. Okay. You want to talk about the adaptions that you
so this wasn't actually in the program that when we heard about it, but the way that we adapted it was on the last week when the program had run its course. So the books had to be in, on the Thursday. The following week, when the books came back on the Monday, the children didn't write that week. They instead sent an invitation to their pen pal to come along to school at a special assembly, or it could be just for morning tea, and they were going to meet their pen pal. And you can imagine that this was a time of great excitement for the children. We need to really encourage the responders to come along to this. We did have some responders who couldn't make it each time, but the children still came along to the special assembly, and they joined in with other adults. So they write an invitation, come along to our assembly so that they can meet up, and then the school bought the children a small box of chocolates to give to their responder, and it was a gift from the student as a thank you. So the students met their responder. We always took them over to the hall and waited in the hall with the children, and at a particular time the responders would start arriving, and they would come and sit in the hall and face the children, and of course the children didn't know which one was going to be their responder, and so then we would link them up. And it was one of those warm fuzzy times. It was just lovely, because the children were so excited, and really they didn't really they weren't fussed about who their respondent was, because they were so motivated with the program. And so they would take their responder for a little walk around the school, have a chat. And it was lovely sometimes, because we would see the responders sitting under a tree with the child, and they would be reading a story to them, or actually reading through all the letters that they'd written to each other, and it was just such a nice thing to do. I've made the point there, we talked about it before, about adding drawings and photos and working that outside of the 10 minutes, so they can illustrate their writing in their own time and do as much as they like with that as well.
I know, again, when I was involved with it, you know, some of the responders would end up playing basketball on the courts with their kids once they'd met them. So it was just a lovely celebration time. And if you think about it, some really lovely warm fuzzies that are all related back to communicating with someone through writing, which is again the point that we want to make here for these reluctant writers, is that it's just a lovely, warm, heartfelt time, really.
I think too that we need to make sure the children know and the responders know that there's a time limit for this, that the connection that they make with each other is for a term. We had a little bit of an unfortunate incident one year where the responder actually took it a little bit further and invited the child to their house and started to sort of mentor the child in that way, and this is not a program for that. The difficulty there was that the child came from a challenged background and was going into a home that was a fairly well-to-do home, and it just made that child feel a little uncomfortable in that situation. So this has to be just for one term, and that's why it's always a good idea to do it on the last day of term or the second to last day of term, because the holidays come and that's the natural finish for the program.
Yeah, it's just for writing, nothing else. Okay, so in conclusion, and then we will open up for anyone that may have any questions. Please, if you do have any questions, start typing them in through the chat or the Q&A function. We're happy to answer any questions that have come up. But just to conclude, the before and after assessments are really important because we want to be able to measure the success of the program. You want to know that after a term of doing this, that there was something that came from it, that it means that you can assess the value of the program and whether or not you run it again. You can use it as part of your data to show that you're responding to these reluctant writers and what the success of that response is. And it's also important to keep a balanced view around the writing that you're receiving, the conventions and the appeal and content. So it's not just about correct sentences, correct grammar, it's also about the interest factor that's involved and the connection that the children have with their writing, how interesting they are as writers as a result. As Linda said earlier, it has been used with Year 2 students, but those are able Year 2 students, but it does work best with the middle to upper levels at primary school. And the book, when it's concluded, the book of letters become the personal property of the student and can be taken home at the conclusion of the program. It doesn't stay at school, it becomes their book. And I suppose it ends up a little bit like a diary for them in a way, doesn't it? Something that they can revisit time and time again as well. So, anything to add to that?
No, I think we've covered most of the points there. I'm sure that if you take on board the program, you'll put some little bits of in that will be relevant to your school and to your children the way that we did. There's no compulsion in meeting up at the end of the program. There's no compulsion in doing what we did with boxes of chocolates and things like that. That was just a twist that we put on it. That worked well for us.
Yeah, so you might want to put your own school's flavour on it. But the idea is that you're following some of those main points, the main conventions around collecting the assessment data, making sure that you're adhering to the structure of the program itself around the setting up, the selection of the students, the selection of the responders, the writing time, the requirements around proofreading and editing and so on. So making sure that that's really clear. As I said earlier, we do have that link available to download that, and I will put that in the comment section of our Facebook page when we're finished, and I'll also put the link in there to access the assessment sheet as well for you too, so you can access both of them and go away and have a look at the summary and the assessment sheet along with it as well. So has anyone got any questions? We finished a little earlier, which is always good. But that's the main crux of what we wanted to share. While I'm waiting to see if there's any questions or chat, we do, the reason for sharing this is obviously that this isn't necessarily play, and that's our wonderful, mantra that we talk about in our kaupapa that we share with everyone that we work with is play. But the reason for sharing this is that we are meeting a lot of teachers who have this cohort of kids coming through, particularly in the middle to senior years, where teachers are feeling a little frustrated that they've got kids who they can see are able to write but are just not motivated to. I have to say a lot of it is our boys, for many reasons, and this was a program that both Linda and I have used before, and with great success. And so it's just a playful way of integrating more writing for some of these kids without it becoming a really arduous, disengaging task for some of these kids. So, questions. We've got Natalie. How do you discuss with children the stranger danger aspect? Is it okay in this instance to write to strangers but not online, etc.? Great point. I'd imagine that when you did it, the idea of online chatting and things was not there.
It was not there.
Yeah.
So I think the whole idea of this is a program that we're running at school, and that this person has been selected to write to you, and we know all about it. We know this person, and you're going to get to meet this person at the end, and just point out that difference between writing to somebody who's completely outside the square and nobody knows anything about them. And I think too, to reassure the kids that you've met them. Yeah. You've met the responders, that they're real people, and that they will get to meet them, as Linda said, but the people that we meet online, we don't necessarily know, we don't know what they look like for real, and just to be able to offer that distinction to them, that they've gone sort of a bit of a, they've gone through the filter, so that that these are people that can be trusted, and that you've got their safety in check. So I hope that answers that question. Just going up here, so that's Natalie's question. Joe, hi Joe. Can this work effectively with a small group of students from the same class rather than a cross group of students? Yeah, the way that we worked it at Lucknow was we had, I think, over 4 different classes. And we just said to teachers, please nominate children from your class who you think would benefit from this program. And so some classes, there'd be 3 or 4 children. Another class, there might be just 2 children. These were specific children from each classroom. So there's no reason why it can't work with a small group in your class. If they meet the criteria of being reluctant writers, yep, absolutely fine. Yeah. Caroline, you've asked about seeing A, B and C again. We can't show that up, but I will put a link in our comment section to this criteria and you'll be able to see it. And if you download the summary sheet, it's got that in there as well. So you can have that and then download it to keep at that point. Brenda, you're having an issue with the assessment sheet link. Again, we'll put it up in the Facebook comments so that you'll be able to click on it and go straight to it as well. Heather, thank you for your kind words there. I hope it all goes well. Deb, can children do this for more than one term? Could they write again to a different responder the next term or year? I think sometimes it loses its impact if you do it too often within the year. We used to run it every year, and yes, some children did do it 2 years in a row. The ones that we identified as needing it, I think that's the point of it. But although this is a fun thing to do and fits in really well with that idea of being a playful way of writing, it is special. And I think, if you ran it too often for the children to do every year, it would lose its impact. So maybe think of some other ideas for those reluctant writers. So no more than twice, I would say, and only once a year. We've got
Brenda, that's fine. I've seen typos in our work tonight, so you're okay on that part. That's okay. Nicole, we've got a question here that we'll answer live. We've talked about this. Would you set this program up for a whole class, including both reluctant and enthusiastic writers, if you could find appropriate adults for all of them?
I'm not sure. I've
think
not done that.
No. I mean, I don't think there's anything
No.
stopping you from doing it, but I think one of the factors that makes this work is the fact that this is a little exclusive for those kids. It's a little bit, I guess you're kind of making it a little bit desirable, which makes it a little bit more engaging. And I think if we're looking at the intent of this for children who are disengaged from writing, then this is a way of engaging children to write. And if you've got kids who willingly write and are quite happy to write, it might take the shine off it for those kids who kind of go, oh, here we go again. So I don't know. It would be interesting to see. We haven't seen it with the enthusiastic writers, but at the same time, I think the idea of making it special and something a bit different and a bit exclusive might just tick the boxes for those reluctant writers.
Yeah, and in the classrooms that I've seen it working, we've never really had the issue where enthusiastic writers have said, oh, I wish I could go on that. I wish I could do that. I think it's always been accepted that this is something that is really special for certain people that we've selected to go on this. Certainly not telling them the reasons why, but just that, you know, this is a special program for them.
Silla's asked, is it suggested that when the teacher is reading with the respondent's letter that they point out the misspelt words that have been correctly used and spelt?
The teacher's reading with the respondent.
So when the letter comes back
I see.
and says, look, they've spelt that.
Yeah, I don't see any reason why you can't do that if you're helping them read it. Yeah, I think in a very gentle way, because we don't want to criticise the letter, and if they think that every time they get a letter back somebody's going to, you know, correct their letter, it's not something that our teachers actually actively did. But I guess if it's something that's being a word that's being used all the time, then I think that would be quite good to do.
And perhaps too pointing out that to the children writing that if they're using a word regularly, a high interest word, that to have a look at how their mystery pen pals spelt it as another resource when they go to write. So perhaps not using word cards or dictionaries, but hey, you know, if it's a word that you think your mystery pen pals use, you might find out how to spell it in their letter. They might have spelled it correctly. So pointing it out in that way rather than saying, right, before you start writing, let's have a look at all the letters, at all the words that, you know, your mystery pen pals written correctly. We don't want it to be in your face, but it might be just pointing out that they can use that letter as a resource.
I think at the end of the day, we have to keep as the bottom line that this is fun. And we don't want to, as teachers, come in and necessarily, you know, kill that fun aspect of it. I think we've just got to be really careful in the way that we handle it.
And Liz, great to hear you listening while you're driving, but we will, as I've said, we'll put the links up on Facebook so that you can click on them directly, and I will make sure they all work as well so they don't cause any frustration. So they will be available as will this recording too. Jo, fantastic. I'd love to hear how you get on when you look for volunteers. And Nicole, thank you. That's a lovely message too. This idea around it's a program that engages reluctant writers, giving them an authentic audience, which is key, is helping our children make a connection to people and realise that writing is a tool to be able to do that and use it as a writing as a tool rather than boring old writing at school all the time, which is the view that often our kids have as reluctant writers. So I hope that we've given you something to think about this evening, and I would imagine that we've probably got some questions on Facebook as well, and I can't see with all my controls here those questions, so I will go in and answer those in our comments after we finish tonight. If you give it a go, we'd love to hear how it gets on, how you get on. If you get a bit stuck, you're more than welcome to email us or message us through Facebook. We're happy to help, and enjoy it, and we hope your kids enjoy it as well.
And have fun with it.
Yeah. So thanks,
Okay.
everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of the holidays. Don't work too hard. Make sure that you give yourselves a good, decent break. You've had a 22-week term, so you're allowed a few more days before you think about school. But all the best for term 3. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.